What is an experience you've had that you cannot logically explain? Story 1. We were on vacation in a town outside of Puerto Vallarta. There was a small church in the middle of an outdoor market, so we decided to take a look at it. For some reason, I felt very close to that church. I wanted to pray and light a candle. As we were leaving the church courtyard, a little girl across the small brick path pointed at me and pulled her mother toward us. The mother said, "Quien? No la conocemos." Who is she? We don't know her. I made eye contact with the little girl. She was very excited and happy to see me. I didn't know her either, but smiled politely. At that moment, I realized. My sister had called me Coco when I was little. I had not been told that name in over 30 years and had never thought about it or spoken it to anyone about that nickname. It was surprising, yet comfortably familiar. The girl's mother took me by the hand and we walked down the street. Years later, my sister is obsessed with family history and tracing our roots. According to her, for generations ago our father's family came from that small town outside of Puerto Vallarta. Story 2. I was working at Toys R Us in the late 90s. It was late fall and we were running a small night crew, 4 to 5 people, in preparation for the Xmas rush. One night, I was the only one who showed up, and the closing manager told me that if I didn't want to be alone in the building all night, I could leave. I was fine with that and actually thought it was kinda cool. They closed up store, set the alarm and left. I usually dial up the store's intercom and play the radio over that intercom. I picked up the radio, dialed up the intercom and set it. It was quiet and uneventful for the next few hours, then suddenly there was a click and the music started again. I went to the front desk where I put the radio down and the radio was still playing. Within 20 minutes the music started again. When I went back to my desk, nothing was working and the radio was not playing anything. Just to be clear, this has never happened before. I had been doing the intercom trick for weeks at this point, and it had never cut out on its own like that. It's 3 a.m. now, and I still have a few hours to go. But it must be the phone, I told myself. Let's move on to another place, so I headed to the appropriate cashier and set it up, which was fine for a couple of hours. I headed to the sporting goods section and started walking around the store with my T-ball wooden bat. I walked around the store, looked in the warehouse, and saw no one. I left the radio on to get back to work, but I couldn't concentrate, the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I can't explain it. Story 3. New Year's Eve 2016. I was out downtown with my brother and some friends having a fun night of bar hopping. I was struck with a terribly panicked sinking feeling that Mom died. Without exchanging a word, my brother looked at me and said, "I think Mom killed herself." It looks like Mom killed herself. I immediately tried to call my mother, about 5 times, but nothing was answered, and all I could do was pray, "Please take me to another world where this won't happen." And then she picked up. She was fine, said she had just had a little too much to drink, asked how our evening had gone, and wished me a happy new year. I will never forget the feeling and the experience. It was like a mutual nightmare. On a lighter note, I have the delightful ability to predict what my father had for dinner. The other night, I had a strange image in my mind of my father eating frozen lasagna while watching TV in the living room, so I predict you had lasagna for dinner. I sent him a message. The reply was, "How did you do that?" It was. I prefer less scary premonitions. Story 4. When I was a little girl, my father and I used to sit on the front steps right before bed. My father would let me talk about whatever was on my mind. I always looked forward to it. One night as we were sitting there, a large ball of pale yellowish light flew over the house. It moved fast and no sound was heard. It headed straight north and soon disappeared behind the trees across the street. I jumped up and pointed at it, excited as expected. Dad calmly took my hand and brought me inside the house. Dad had a brief conversation with Mom and I was tucked into bed. The next morning, when I told him about it, he said it must have been a dream. Years later, Dad admitted that, yeah, he saw it too. But he still wouldn't talk about it. Story 5. One day I woke up in the middle of the night. My eyes were still blurry from sleep, but I saw a human form standing before me. It appeared to be half crouched, hands on its knees, tilting its head as if trying to get a better look at my face. I remember being confused because I thought it was my mother. Then my eyes adjusted and I realized that this person had no features. It was a shadowy person, but gray and static. I got scared and closed my eyes hoping it would go away. After a while I think I fell asleep. It was a really strange experience. I have had many other strange experiences that I can't explain. One of them was particularly creepy. Story 6. I was taking my kids to a doctor's appointment, and as I was walking from the car, everything around me stopped. It only took a split second and everything was back to normal. We were right next to one of the busiest intersections in town, so that never happened. I could have blown it off as my imagination, but at that moment, my kid said, "Did time just stop?" Story 7. My parents had the priest exorcise the house. My mother insisted that seeing demons had nothing to do with being manic, but we didn't argue. As the priest was walking around the house, suddenly a swarm of cockroaches erupted from behind him, peeked out from behind him through a gap in the pavement, fanned away from him like a wake, and disappeared as soon as they appeared. It was the first time I had ever seen the insects act in perfect coordination, like a single nest. The cockroaches were scattered irregularly and varied in size. These cockroaches were the exact same size and color and moved in perfect unison. It was a matter of seconds. My sister, also an atheist, saw it, but everyone else was walking alongside the priest. Later we went back to investigate. Never later had we ever seen a cockroach in or around that basement. The obvious explanation would be a strange cockroach coincidence, but I do not know. It was odd. Story 8. About 10 years ago, when California was in the midst of a drought, I woke up one morning to find the entire backyard overgrown with grass. There was no milk in the refrigerator, but there was a jug of fruit punch. My father drove me to the store to get some milk and we talked about how much we loved this milk and how it was one of the only things we always kept in the house and never emptied. We pulled into the parking lot of a nearby Save Mart and as we were looking for a place, I saw the license plate of the car in front of us. I love/like milk too. I don't remember the exact sequence of numbers. We were both speechless and stunned, and brought it up for years after this shock. Story 9. Let me preface this by saying that I have sky-affective disorder, which means I have hallucinations and delusions like a schizophrenic, but they are all affected by a mood disorder. So in 3rd grade, I remember having a serious panic attack and hiding under my computer desk, just staring into space and trying to calm down. 2 voices were talking to me and I couldn't calm down. One of them said, "Wait here, I'll get someone for you," but I had no idea what he meant because he wasn't real and no one could see him. 2 seconds later, a guy from the same class knelt down in front of me and asked if I had had a panic attack. A few hours later I went to a class where I had a test that I had completely forgotten about. I was sitting at my desk in the classroom, about to have another panic attack because I didn't know the answer. Then I heard a voice say, "Okay, I'm getting you out of here." And then the fire alarm went off. Keep in mind, I had no idea that there was going to be a fire drill that day, much less at that time of day. So I took a 15-minute break outside and then was able to go back in and finish the test without having a panic attack. Story 10. Traffic accident that never happened. I was about to turn. I looked left and right and saw absolutely 0 cars coming in. I turned right and bam! I was hit and my front bumper came off. There were absolutely no cars on the road and I could see for miles in either direction, so there was absolutely no reason for such an accident to happen. I was stunned. He asked me how I had not noticed him, but I was too shocked to answer. This accident could not have happened because there were no cars on the road. My eyesight is so good that I cannot comprehend how I could miss an obvious car coming down the road. The speed limit was 35, so even a speeding car would have noticed. His car had only minor scrapes, but my front bumper was torn off. My headlight was also cracked. He decided to paint them over, but we exchanged insurance info and went our separate ways. I left my bumper in the back seat and went to work. There was no phone call or anything regarding the accident. When I left work that afternoon, I noticed the bumper was mounted. No signs of damage. No broken headlights either. Nothing. The notebook with the man's information is no longer there. The cell phone that took the photos is also gone. The photos were missing. I still can't explain it. Did I hallucinate the car accident? Was it my imagination? Or did the universe decide that the accident really couldn't happen and somehow reversed it? I don't know. I don't understand what you mean. Story 11. TLDR, strange voice saved my autistic sister from drowning when I was a teenager. I was alone in the kitchen and the extremely intrusive thought of, let's go check on my sister, repeatedly came to mind. My sister is severely autistic and suffers from cerebral palsy and epilepsy. Anyway, I ignored this thought to check on my sister and kept working, but something kept telling me to check on my sister. After maybe a minute or so I heard this voice. It was a distinct voice, as if someone was in the kitchen with me. Listen to me. Listen. Listen. Listen to me. Needless to say, it hit me hard enough to make me stop whatever bullet I was doing, and I called my sister and headed for her room. I heard a funny sound like a splash and I turned from my sister's room toward the downstairs bathroom. My sister was face down in the tub having a drowning fit. My sister was not splashing or anything, and the sound of the water is still weird to this day. I was able to rescue my sister and she survived. I could not save my sister that day. That strange voice saved my sister. I wasn't usually home and my mother was drunk and passed out in her bedroom. This was before I started drinking, using drugs, and generally going crazy, so I wasn't hallucinating. Something saved my sister. I can only explain it as God. I have always believed that there is a God, but I can't and won't try to explain the craziness of actually having some sort of higher power. My sisters are alive and happy today and my mother and I are sober now. Story 12. It sounds pretty silly, but one night during winter break 2008, I was playing Gears of War 2 online with my cousin. It was about 1 a.m. and my uncle told me to turn it off and go to bed. I went upstairs to go to the bathroom, my room was in the basement, and looked out the back door and saw the biggest, brightest full moon I had ever seen. It was like orange in color. I went to the bathroom and tried to look again when I came out. But the full moon was completely gone. There were no clouds in the sky, but the moon I saw was gone. It was a perfectly clear night and I felt very strange that the moon had disappeared. I couldn't see the moon when I went outside and walked past my house. I've been telling people about this for years and they all say that the moon must have been obscured by the clouds. Like I said, it's ridiculous and I pass it on. A few months ago I was looking at my achievements on Xbox and saw Gears of War 2. The night I was playing with my cousin was December 30th, 2008. So I decided to check the phase of the moon that day, and it was a crescent moon on the upper sign. It was far from a full moon. So I have no idea what I saw in the sky that night. Story 13. A few years ago I had a few friends over to my apartment. Late at night we were outside smoking, drinking, and just talking. One of them spotted a plane in the sky and joked that it might be a UFO. It was quite bright and moving strangely, but we didn't think much of it. Again, we just joked that it was a UFO. Then a second flying object came into view, both flying around each other. We still thought it was a plane or helicopter, but the way it was moving, we were both No. Surely not. I had a look on my face like, I'm sure it's not a plane. Then, also out of nowhere, sparks began to erupt from the first aircraft we saw. It looked like it had hit something in the air. We all said in unison, "What the hell is this?" We all said in unison, "What the hell is this?" Sparks continued to erupt, and the plane began to fall. It was nighttime, so the sparks were bright against the dark sky. It was like when a transformer explodes and sparks fly from it. But from the sky. At this time we were bracing ourselves for the explosion to hit the ground. The other aircraft seemed to be chasing the first one as it fell. Then it flew off in another direction and took off. We didn't hear the crash, and I searched the internet for news of plane crashes, but saw nothing. I'm not saying it was an alien. Story 14. Aside from the weird dream, I had a dream that my wife's friend was having an affair, was leaving her husband, and came to help because the basement of their house was flooded. I told my wife about it, she told my friend about it, and my friend was shocked and admitted that he had been having an affair and that the basement of their townhouse had flooded 2 years ago. Since then, she has persistently asked me if I have ever had such a dream. Years later, my friend remarried, my wife and I had a child, and my friend and her new husband also announced they were pregnant. A few months later, I had a dream that my child said goodbye to friend. The next day, my friend went to the hospital and found out that the baby was missing some chromosomes to develop a normal heart and brain, and the rest was just sad news. I was so disappointed because they were wonderful people and so excited to have a baby. Story 15. I had a dream about my cat whom I hadn't seen in weeks. In the dream I was walking down an alley to see a fortune teller. The fortune teller told me that my cat was in a dumpster at the end of the alley. When I reached the dumpster, I took my cat's lifeless body out of the dumpster and held him one last time. He had one eye closed. The next day, I awoke and decided to walk home from the gym down an unfamiliar street. As I walked, I noticed a bright white cat in the trees next to the sidewalk, matching my pace. This cat was fussing for me to say hello, so of course I stopped and offered him my pet. When the cat came up next to me, I noticed that only one eye was functioning. Story 16. I wake up on October 10, 1992, 8 years old, sweating from a nightmare I just had. I go to find my mom. Mom, I had a nightmare. I was in a car accident. Mom calmed me down. Later, Mom called me. I'm getting rid of my fish tank, do you want to take some fish home? Mom said, yes, I'm coming. Then she put me and my brother in my dad's old Valiant. On the way to the office, a woman failed to pay attention, ran a red light, hit us, and totaled the car. If we had not been in the old steel-bodied car, the inspector said, all 3 of us would have died. Since then I have believed my déjà vu and other little things my brain is trying to tell me. Story 17. Synchronicities, or meaningful coincidences, abound. Let me give you one really odd example. One time, while driving home from work, I decided to pick a random 2-digit number and count how many times I saw that number on the license plates of other cars. I chose the number 86. Then I saw 86 on 2 cars in a row. I thought this was quite unusual. The next morning, while driving to work, I saw 8,686 cars. When I arrived at work, I saw a woman in the building wearing a shirt with the number 86 written in large letters. Surprised, I decided to take a break and find out if the number 86 had any special meaning. As it turned out, 86 means, quit. This was the first time I had ever heard of the word nix. And on my way home that day, it would be a stretch to say that I did not see a license plate with NXX on it. Story 18. When I was 20, I saw an iridologist who pulled several bottles of mysterious herbs and supplements from his shelves to solve every problem. Looking at my iris, he somehow identified several of my injuries. They included a martial arts knee injury that had healed, and that I had scraped my arm that morning. I was wearing a sweater, which I was not wearing when I chafed my arm, so he couldn't see the wound, and it didn't really hurt, so he wasn't treating me like a baby. Same with my knee, it healed and there was no sign of it in my gait. It was not cold reading. He did not throw out a bunch of diagnoses or take some hits. He didn't say much, but what he did say was pretty accurate. Since then, I have looked into iridology, but there seems to be no scientific proof. I've since met an acting coach who is super duper sharp and regularly does the same Sherlock Holmes reading for me. Maybe it's true. Story 19. At one point, I had a high temperature of 40 degrees Celsius, freezing but boiling at the same time. The temperature was neither cold nor warm, so I got a little nervous and decided to go down the street. Hello. I'm here. Can you see me? Help me. Everyone was yelling and I could see people standing in the fog looking this way and that at random, so I approached and asked someone what was going on, but they didn't notice me. It was as if I was invisible to them and they looked desperate. They looked like Mexican hairless dogs, but with skeletal-like spots on their skin, and I don't know why, but they looked friendly to me. I panicked, so naturally I went inside the building, which was a busy waiting room full of slack-jawed, chatty creatures doing what government employees do best at the DMV. I took the number 33. Well, not many people would be in front of me, and they were. What's your name? I told him my name, and the old man typed it into the computer. May I have your death certificate, please? My what? A piece of paper to show that you are officially dead. You must have it. I don't have anything, I just showed up here. The creature seemed to have had a long day and was fed up with this nonsense. Get out. When I woke up, no fever, no illness, everything was fine. My friend said that was a Wendigo, but I think it was a Xoloitzcuintli in its original form. Otherwise, I would have definitely walked in purgatory. Story 20. I found a creature that was not supposed to exist, that should not exist. As a child, I found a concrete blister, a small bubble, at the base of a pillar. The surface of the blister must have been very thin, and I could smash it open with an empty plastic bottle. Inside was a bright green, two-headed worm wriggling around. Though it was two-headed, it looked as if part of its body had branched off at a 45-degree angle, shorter than the main head. Aside from its strange appearance, how on earth did it get there and how did it survive? This bubble was completely sealed on the outside and there was no concrete tunnel leading into the bubble. What did it eat and how did it breathe in a sealed concrete bubble barely longer than its own body? Story 21. This one experience would haunt me for the rest of my life. I lived in an old apartment building in downtown near Portland, Oregon. The building was probably built around 1920. Anyway, I had Monday morning off work and decided to do laundry. It was a quiet morning. The worst thing about these old buildings is that the laundromat is usually in the basement. I gathered up the bed sheets and a large blanket. There was a laundry pod above, so I grabbed a few coins. I went down the stairs just to the right of the front door. I didn't pass anyone going up or down, just old me going down to do laundry alone. No big deal. I went into the basement and put the sheets in the washer, only to realize that the big blanket wouldn't fit. That's okay, I can wash one sheet and one blanket. As I was putting the quarters in one at a time, I realized I was missing one quarter. I quickly went up the stairs, but again I didn't pass anyone. I picked up the quarter in the living room and quickly went back down to the basement. When I returned to the basement, the large down comforter blanket I had left in front of the washing machine was no longer on the floor. It was folded perfectly on the folding table on the other side of the basement. This was far away. Not right next to the washing machine. Across the entire basement. This was a heavy blanket. My apartment door was right outside this basement, so it would take me long enough to get in where someone was trying to fold it. No one was coming down. I would have walked past. After this I learned that my apartment was very haunted, but I just saw something. Like walking shadows. No actual physical objects moving around. I know 10,000% that it is not normal and to this day have no way to explain it. So yes, I moved out. Story 22. I actually have a few of them. All of them are from my childhood. One time, I went to bed on Monday and woke up on Thursday. I had no memory of those 2 days, but according to my mother, I was going to school normally. Only once did I wake up to clearly hear a loud knock on the door. The knocking woke me up in the first place, but I did not remember hearing it at all. I also did not dream that someone was knocking on my door, so I do not know what happened. There was no one at the door either. When I moved into my new apartment, there was a spider on the wall. I was so afraid of spiders that I didn't even want to kill it, but this spider didn't move and looked like it was already dead, so I named him Gerald and lived with him. After a month he started moving about 2 inches every day. I never saw him move, but he was in a different spot in his corner every day. One day I opened my bedroom door and Gerald was alive and moving. I was still afraid of spiders, so I ran to call my mother and she killed Gerald with a broom. TLDR, being a child is strange indeed. Story 23. This was a relatively recent event, mid-2020, and I still have no idea what caused it. Please jump to the bottom to see my mother's burns. I was lying in bed with an unremarkable headache, a normal stuffy, oppressive headache, and decided to take a nap for a few hours. Eventually, for some reason, I felt like I was falling forward instead of upward. I was sleeping on my back, which made the sensation even stranger and more confusing. But it felt like I was suspended in mid-air, leaning forward from the edge. After a minute or so, I felt as if I were underwater or sleep paralysis. I couldn't move anything, but my arms and torso gradually tensed up. I couldn't open my eyes, but I could see something dark blue. Like an old video of me listening to music on a media player. Anyway, while my legs were frozen and my upper body was tense, I felt my arms slowly lifting straight up, toward the ceiling, not toward my head. While my forearms were lifting, my shoulders, back, abdominal muscles, and pecs all tensed up and felt like they were being pulled inward to my sternum. During this time I am fully awake and conscious, but unable to open my eyes. I have no way of confirming this, but I feel like I have been in this state for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. While everything was tense, my breathing was quickening, but it was not a panic attack. My arms and chest began to shake. It was more like a rumbling vibration than a violent one. The shaking lasted only a few seconds, and then suddenly my eyes opened. I was trying very hard to keep them open during this time, and I saw my hands and forearms floating in the air, fingers fully extended. Then, in another instant, my arms dropped, my body relaxed, and I was able to move again. Immediately afterwards and through the next day, I was completely exhausted. I called my mother to tell her this and consulted with her friend's doctor. My mother worked in the neurologist's office in the hospital, so access to doctors was easy. Every doctor said it wasn't a seizure and her heart and brain tests were normal. Every doctor said it wasn't a seizure, and the heart and brain tests were normal. And the promised burn. After all the doctors said nothing, I told my mother about it again. Story 24. When I was 16, I stayed at my best friend's house. Downstairs there was a living room, kitchen, dining room and a small bathroom, and upstairs there were 3 bedrooms and a large bathroom for context. The next morning I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth. When I went into her room to put my toothbrush away, I noticed her sitting at the sink brushing her hair. I don't remember what we talked about, but the conversation was brief. When I said something about her mother calling for us, she said, "Go on, I'll be right down." I went downstairs to the kitchen and she was already sitting at the table. I asked her how she got downstairs and she said she had been down there for at least 5 minutes. I explained to her that it couldn't have been because I had just talked to her in her bedroom about a minute ago. The house only has 1 set of stairs and she would have had to pass me on the stairs to get to the kitchen before me. She did not. Story 25. Preface: My daughter was about 2.5 years old when this happened, and her room shared a wall with my husband and I's room. One night I woke up to hear my daughter giggling and talking. It is not uncommon for small children to talk to themselves, so at first I listened, but then I realized that my daughter was definitely having some sort of conversation, and I turned my attention back to the chatter. My daughter asked me some question, e.g., "What is your name?" and I asked her what she was talking about. I listened for a while, but after I understood everything, I jumped out of bed, grabbed the bedside bat, and ran to my daughter's room. When I opened the door, my daughter was sitting on her crib looking at the wall. I took a quick look around and everything was normal. I asked her, "Who were you talking to?" Her reply was just, "Gamma, Grandma," in 2-year-old language. Thinking that she was playing or dreaming because she is very close to her two grandmothers, I reassured her and went back to bed. The next night I awoke to the same chatter. I told my wife about the previous night and she asked me to wake her up if it happened again. So I woke my wife and we both listened. The same questions and giggles ensued. My wife got creeped out and we both went to our daughter's room. Again our daughter was sitting in her crib, smiling, giggling, and very awake. My wife asked my daughter who she was with and the answer was the same. My wife replied, "Grandma X and Grandma Y are sleeping at their respective homes." My grandmother had passed away 5 years earlier at this point. My daughter then replied, "They are not here, they are here," and pointed to a rocking chair in the corner of the room. I said, "Are you still here?" To which she replied, "No, she's already gone." My wife and I looked at each other wide-eyed, and I went downstairs and pulled out a picture of my grandmother from a drawer. When I showed the picture to my daughter, she squealed with delight, pointed to it, and said, "Oh, no, she's gone. Papa Gamma likes ducks. Quack quack." I got really scared at this point. My grandmother really liked ducks. She fed a large flock of ducks every winter and had duck-themed art all over the house. Also, since there were no pictures of anyone in our house except for the children and the one from our wedding, my daughter never saw her grandmother's pictures on a regular basis and would just dream about them. So I don't think my daughter would have seen her grandmother's photos on a regular basis, she would have just dreamed about them, and I can't think of any reason why a 2-year-old daughter would know such a specific life story of her grandmother. I am also a firm believer in ghosts, hallucinations, spirits, and of course any kind of afterlife. However, I could not come up with a logical reason why this happened. Story 26. This happened to me this past Friday. I dropped my youngest off at school and returned home. It was garbage day, so I carried the trash cans out to the end of the driveway, locked the door and went back into the house. I went down the hallway to my bedroom and washed my hands in the bathroom. As I was drying my hands, I heard the TV. I frowned and wondered if my oldest son had come home early from class. I walked down the hallway and realized that the TV sounded like the TV in the den. The lights were off, but I could see the TV flickering on the wall. I turned on the light and went inside. The TV was definitely on, and LOTR, The Return of the King, was playing. I was puzzled. When I left the house to take my son to school, we were the last ones out, and the TV was definitely not on. The same was true when we entered the house to pack up the last of the trash after dropping our son off at school. I looked for the remote control on the bookshelf and was about to turn it off when the TV screen went black. Frowning, I pressed the power button and the TV came on with no problem. Not wanting to waste any more time, I turned off the TV, put the remote back on the bookshelf, and went about my business. When my oldest son came home that morning, I was about to tell him over a snack I had prepared for him that the TV was acting strangely when I heard the TV on in the den. He was sitting at the island kitchen and I was across from him cleaning up. He laughed a little. "What in the world is?" I replied. "I had the same thing happen to me today. I think there was a glitch. So at least I wasn't alone." Story 27. I hear noises in my house. One night late at night, 3 a.m., I was in the kitchen and heard what sounded like a cell phone vibrating. It sounded like it was coming from under the floor. I only have one cell phone in my house and it was not mine. My cell phone is in my room on the other side of the house and I can't hear it from the kitchen even though I have music on. I hear men and women talking, whispering loudly, I hear noises under the house. One day I smell a man's cologne, a few days later a brutal man's body odor, a knock on the side of the house, the other day I heard a man sneeze, and when I got home the kitchen window was open. I have never opened the kitchen window. I went into the bathroom and found dark pubic hair on the toilet seat, not the first time. I called the police and they said they couldn't do anything, just check to see if anyone lived under the house. But I didn't check the attic. I don't feel comfortable going up into the attic. I'm going to do it in a few days. If someone is in the attic, they won't get far unless they make friends with my dog while I am out. My dog is very protective and has woken me up late at night with his barking. By the time I get dressed and run around the house to see what he is barking at, whatever it is, he is gone. Story 28. Drive to Tennessee and maybe time travel. By accident. To tell this story, you need to understand Atlanta. If you're good at this, skip ahead. Atlanta can be summed up nicely by looking at the 285 bypass road as the border of a clock face. I lived in Sandy Springs. At the time, my roommate and I were working at the Georgia Renaissance Festival, where highways 75 and 85 enter the upper clock as separate highways, merge a bit in the middle, and split again before leaving the clock. We had planned to take 285 to avoid traffic and then go left, around the bypass to head north to our home. But after a major accident in that direction, the monster traffic had other ideas, so we decided to go right, and connect to 85 to continue north and cut through the city center. I could return to my intended route a little west of home. Just past the Capitol, I called my roommate to tell her about the traffic, my plans, and that I would not be having dinner. The time was about 6:45 p.m. When routes 85 and 75 merged, the traffic cleared and we were off. 10 minutes or so later, we had a small problem. I looked out the window and noticed a rather serious-looking swamp. I had just arrived in Atlanta, so the sight startled me. I pointed this out to my roommate and told her I had no idea there were swamps in Atlanta. I will never forget her response. "What are you talking about? There are no swamps in Atlanta." My roommate looked out from my side of the street and noticed the swamp and noticed an exit sign for a town I had never heard of. She swore, pulled over at the next exit, and headed south again. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that she had somehow missed 285 and ended up near the Tennessee state line. She had her roommate call again. According to the call log, only 15 minutes had elapsed, which was an impossibly short drive since it would have taken 2.5 hours to get back on 285. I still can't explain it. Story 29. This happened a few years ago now, but I need to give some background first so that the story makes sense. Me, my brother, and a friend were playing a 40-40 game, a kind of hide-and-seek, on the property of a friend's house. The property was large, with a huge yard and lot, maybe several hundred meters long, separated from the rest of the property by trees and hedges that made it impossible to see from the top of the property. Since it was night, the searcher had a flashlight and the other two lurkers could hide in the darkness. And to give the searchers a chance to win, the lurkers had to shout into the darkness every few minutes to give the searchers a hint of where they were hiding. At the time, I had been searching for the two of them for several minutes and was at the bottom of the property, with a pile of logs behind me and a cabin on the edge of the woods in front of me. I heard a noise behind me and turned around to light the woodpile with my torch, and for a moment I saw what looked like a glint of an eye by the logs, could have been an animal, but still scary. About 10 seconds later, I suddenly heard a second quick rustle from behind the shed by the grove of trees. I started walking toward the shed and heard someone whisper my name from behind the shed. It sounded exactly like my brother's voice. It was an exact copy of his voice whispering my name. I started walking toward the voice, hoping that my brother was hiding there. Suddenly, I heard my brother and my friend yelling, according to the rules of the game, from the other side of the property. I quickly responded in two different ways and began running and screaming in the direction of their faint cries, trying to get away from whatever it was that was whispering my name. I still don't know who or what was trying to lure me into the tree line. Especially the fact that whatever it was knew my name and sounded exactly like my brother. I still get chills thinking about what would have happened if the others hadn't turned me around and made me run in the other direction. TLDR, during a night of hide and seek, something that mimicked my brother's voice tried to lure me into the woods. Story 30. While on vacation, I caught a strange bug and developed a high fever and couldn't choke down anything. The high fever caused me to have some really strange hallucinations, like a hippo flying over my bed and the TV melting. But the strangest hallucination was when I felt my consciousness leave my body and float through the walls. I went into some hotel rooms and saw a couple arguing. I remember the whole argument they were having. It was about the woman's mother being too involved in their relationship and only her girlfriend taking care of the household chores. It was very passive and I remember sitting in bed listening to them arguing. By the end of the trip I was feeling much better, my fever had gone down completely, and my family decided to take me to the beach. Sitting on the beach, I looked to my right and saw the couple I had hallucinated a few days earlier arguing. And I was shocked. They were basically having the exact same argument that I had seen in my hallucination. It was literally a continuation of the fight I had seen in my hallucination. I don't know if my soul really left my body to witness this couple's fight or if it was just a coincidence, lol. Most people don't believe me when I tell them this. Story 31. As an adventurous and independent-minded young man, I decided that I needed a quick weekend trip to ski the big mountains of Colorado. I had only skied the local hills before, which were fun, but far from monumental. We drove the entire way on Friday, 14 hours, to get to town with enough time to get something to eat and get ready for bed so we could ski all day Saturday. It was a lot of fun. I had so much fun that I decided to buy a half-day ticket for Sunday. I could ski half a day and still drive home tonight. To no one's surprise, nearly 10 hours into the 14-hour drive, my eyelids grew heavy. My eyelids closed for a moment as if someone had tapped me on the shoulder and woken me up. When I opened my eyes, 3 of the 4 lanes were closed, and I could barely get into the only open lane. Thankfully, it was quite late and there were no other cars around. That alone would have made the drive home an experience of a lifetime. But then it happened. I felt as if I had woken up startled enough to finish the drive, and as I stumbled along the open road in the dark, I felt an indescribable stabbing pain in my ribs. The pain did not subside immediately, and after a few sharp waves of pain, it eventually faded. When I returned home, my answering machine, yes, I am not getting any younger, was full of messages from family members. At the exact moment I felt the stabbing pain, one of my brothers was having a tube shoved into his chest to relieve the pressure and drain his pneumothorax, a hole in his lung caused by a broken rib in a car accident. I never really talked much about it, and to this day I don't really know what to think about it. But if that is not an appropriate answer to the question posed, then I have no answer. Story 32. I was a kid, probably between the ages of 8 and 10, sledding with my father at night in our neighbor's backyard. This may sound strange, but anyone who lives where it snows knows that snow makes it very easy to see, even at night. The backyard was steep, so after sliding down one slope and climbing back up, I got tired and laid down on my back for a bit. It was a clear night. After a while I noticed 3 bright red dots in the sky. The moment I caught my father's attention, the 3 dots flew off in 3 different directions. To this day, my father is convinced that I am taunting him, but I am not. I did not grow up believing in aliens, but after this experience I am convinced we are not alone. Story 33. A few years ago, my partner and I lived in this rundown apartment building. As with most old apartments in this neighborhood, the entrance door to the dwelling was sturdy, a very heavy fire door with rusty hinges. I had trouble opening it for several days. All around the apartment, I could always see the silhouette of a dark man. He seemed negative, but not in a harmful way, like he was glaring across the room. I named him Shadow John because it was funny. He was away for the night, just me and the cats. I was playing Fallout on my laptop and watching Planet Earth on TV for the cats. It was around 10 or 11 p.m. I felt like my heart had stopped. It was locked, that's for sure. When I looked, there was nothing there and the door was still open. Anyone who knows anything about sturdy fire doors knows that they close on their own. I grabbed the kitten and locked her in the bedroom while I called the building manager. The super showed up, checked the apartment, and found nothing. Since this is a small apartment building, he has access to the cameras in the hall and doesn't need the owner's approval or anything. When the door opens, there is no one in the hall. Again, it is a fire door, so there was no wind or draft. We were both confused and still scared. Yes, we moved out. Story 34. Through these experiences, I have come to have one hypothesis about the paranormal. I believe that we are all born, for lack of a better word, connected to the universe. However, I believe that some of us remain connected to the universe past childhood and some of us have the potential to connect with it. My small benefit is that I can feel the presence of my soul at funerals. I did not feel my siblings, my mother, or my father, but I could feel my cousins and my grandfather. I don't talk to them and they don't talk to me. It always scared me, and if I had to attend, I would need a stiff drink. The last person I met was my cousin. He was very warm and loving and still scares me, but he was one of the best men I have ever known. He left his ex after the divorce. She seemed a little odd, but he would listen to whatever she was mumbling silently and try to comfort her. I think this is an ability that some people cultivate and others choose to leave alone. I looked it up once and it seems to be a universal belief that the soul stays on Earth for 1 to 3 days. Fortunately, most souls leave Earth when the body dies. There are also those who happily believe, much to our mutual shame, that they do not actually have a soul. I come from a strange Christian background and was punished when I first tried to talk to someone as a child. If I hadn't understood what was going on and kept my mouth shut, I might have found myself the main target of an exorcism. So that extra sense of danger, caution, and anxiety may be in your animal brain or still a little plugged in. So I don't know if people who take large sums of money from people are legit or not, but it's the same mechanism. I don't think they are getting more money than I am, but they are trying to do something I am not. But after that window, I have never felt that way about anyone. Story 35. I am an atheist. I don't believe in fate or destiny. I don't mock or ridicule anyone. In fact, I think paganism is kinda cool and I love Norse mythology. That aside, I moved back home with my wife and 2 kids because my mother was ill. Unfortunately, my mother passed away about 3 months ago. My wife and I are wondering if we should return to our former state where I still work. Our son is developmentally delayed and we have found a great therapist and school here in town. I am now looking for a job that pays commensurate with my education, PhD, and experience. Aside from my primary job, I have a passion for turning things upside down. Mostly comics and video games, but I have sold some antiques as well. 3 weeks ago, I was browsing my local comic store when I got a call from the place I applied to in January. It is located 20 minutes from my father's house and my family currently lives there to help out. I had an interview last Tuesday. Here's where it gets weird. The Monday before the interview my wife and I were talking about moving. Last week I realized I needed a shirt for 2, so I went to Walmart. I didn't need pants, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to have another pair. Everyone thinks this is a good sign. I've had about 5 interviews so far, and none of them have gone my way. But I have a feeling that this whole thing is not just a coincidence. This Tuesday 10/05 will be the 7th day since my interview. I have no expectations. Story 36. There are many, but let me tell you one story that makes absolutely no sense. One time my ex-boyfriend and I spent the night in a hotel. Our room was creepy, and as soon as we stepped in I told him I didn't want to be here. But hey, it was cheap and it was only for one night. So we both fell asleep, and I had a horrible dream that gave me flashbacks of all the good and bad things in my past. And that dream ended the day my father died. The scene froze with my father's dead body as the phone rang, like an old landline, probably a ringtone. My ex and I woke up at the same time in panic. He grabbed my arm and said, "I'm sorry." Therefrom, he named random places in Russia that I don't remember. Basically, we both dreamed the phone rang. He picked up the phone and I heard it ring. I woke up with images of my dead father, and he was talking to a Russian about my father in the dream. Some background info: my ex never even met my father. Because my father died a few years before we met. I have barely even talked about my father with him. No one knows why this random city in Russia is relevant. The only thing I can think of is that my father was loved for his music by Russians on YouTube. Story 37. This happened to me a few months ago. I was driving at night with my husband in the passenger seat to his brother's house. I was driving on a 3-lane highway with hardly any pedestrian traffic, and we both suddenly saw a white streak of light cross the road from left to right, almost to ground level. And his sneakers seemed to reflect my headlights. It looked like his sneakers were reflecting my headlights. But the light was super fast and crossed the 3-lane highway in less than 3 seconds. This man must be the Flash. My husband asked me, "Did that man cross the highway in a flash of light?" He asked me something like that. I replied that it really did look that way. I started to say that there must be some explanation, such as an optical illusion, but he said he didn't want to think about it. I still don't know exactly what we saw that night. Story 38. Atheist but Christian family. I visited the saint's family home with my family, prayed and looked at the casket that was on display. My aunt and I were looking at the casket from a distance and noticed something moving. It seemed to be the shadow of something lying on its side. It got up and turned its face toward me. The coffin was surrounded by glass, so I assumed it was someone's reflection. However, because the shadow I saw was at eye level, I realized that no one was actually lying behind me. It all happened in a split second. I looked behind me and sure enough, no one was there. In fact, there was hardly anyone in the room, so I had no time for this and escaped unnoticed. I would have heard him right away. Besides, there was no one to match the description of the man I saw. I asked my aunt if she saw what I saw, but she had no idea what I was talking about. I was about 11 years old and didn't bother to tell anyone about my experience. Until a few weeks later when I went to the bathroom to get ready for bed. My mother always had a picture of a saint on the bathroom mirror. I looked at it, expecting to see her usual peaceful expression. But this time I felt a chill run down my spine. Instead of a peaceful expression, the picture of saint that popped into my head was a malevolent face grinning from ear to ear with rotting teeth and a sinister laugh ringing in my ears. I ignored it because it was in my mind, but the picture was too vivid and the laughter too loud to bear. The same thing continued for more than a month, then stopped spontaneously. 6 years later, I still get chills. Now that I am an adult, when I tell my family about that time, they think I saw an angel that day. But if angels are like this, I would gladly consider heck. Story 39. When I was very young, about 7 years old, I saw a boy in a blue t-shirt running around the backyard of our house. We lived in a very rural area. We had only one neighbor, and that neighbor had no children. If there had been a child who had wandered onto our property, he would have had to come from many miles away. I told my mother about him and she went out to look for him. But she never saw him and thought it was my imagination. A few nights later, he apparently showed up in the living room. I did not see him that night, but my mother saw a boy in a blue t-shirt cross the living room and hide behind a chair. Of course, when she looked behind the chair, he was gone. It scares me to think about it. I don't really believe in ghosts, and I wonder what in the world he was haunted by. We were the first people to live in this house and it was newly built when we moved in. Our lot had not yet been completely cleared, so if it had been inhabited before, it was a long time ago. A blue t-shirt would not have been an option. Unfortunately, this mystery will never be solved. Story 40. Just recently, an unexplainable glitch happened to me and my father. We went to the hospital to see my uncle and parked our car in the hospital parking lot. We were supposed to park on level 2. Turns out we were not on level 4 because there are 4 levels in this parking lot and the top level was open air. We checked levels 1 to 3 about 5 times each and each time there were about 10 or 15 cars parked on each level. We spent half an hour on and off the lift, feeling like fools trying to find our car, and half an hour later we tried again on level 2 for the 7th time, only to find that the lift had opened up and we were now on level 3. When the lift opened, the parking lot was jammed with cars and my car was right where we had left it. I can't explain what happened, and no one believes me. Weeks later, I still don't understand what the hell happened. Story 41. Several years ago I had to pass the scene of a fatal accident on my way to work. The street I lived on was just off a busy highway. I turned onto the highway and suddenly, in the middle of police cars and lights, I saw a motorcycle broken into pieces and a body covered in sheets lying in the road. It was very quiet. The officer motioned for me to drive through slowly. I was upset and went about my business, but I didn't tell anyone. What I will never forget is that the dead man's feet were sticking out from under the seat with tennis shoes on. It never occurred to that person to wear those shoes that day and die in them. According to the local news that day, it was a hit and run, and the motorcyclist was a beloved family man who liked to drive on full moon nights. I had seen several other fatal accident scenes and terrible car accidents, but for some reason, this one never left my mind. A year later, I was taking an EMT class. I missed an important test and had to take another EMT class to make up the credit. I did not know anyone in that class at all. I chatted with my new seat neighbor, and soon the conversation turned to the bad accidents we had seen. I told him about the tennis shoe accident. The kid sitting next to me on my left got serious and asked me where the accident had happened. When I told him the name of the neighborhood, he said, "My dad." I couldn't believe it. I don't remember what we talked about after that, but I was able to ask him about his father and his interest in becoming an EMT. He said he was now in EMT classes because of that. I don't know if that was touching to him or not, but I did get some closure from this scene that has stuck with me a bit over the past few years. The man's son was going to be a paramedic. It was just crazy. I missed a random test, sat next to a random person in a random class, and one of them was the son of the driver who died in that accident. I'm sure he graduated and went on to help a lot of people. Story 42. Living in a very rural area, my brother and I fell asleep watching a movie in the living room. Middle of the night, the basement door to the outside opens, stairs right next to us, and footsteps slowly come up. We look at each other scared, no reason for anyone to be down there or outside at that time. All audible, steps go into the bathroom. Light turns on. 45 seconds later, light turns off, steps go back downstairs. In the morning, my mom wakes us up and asks why we're going from the basement to the bathroom in the middle of the night, panicked. She heard the same thing after suddenly waking up. The door was still locked in the morning. My dad was in another country, and someone was murdered in that house when it was built. I don't believe in ghosts, and if they don't exist, someone from somewhere came into our house to stand in a bathroom for about a minute. We lived in a field. I can't logically explain that.